This is there every week. That's the food. Real quick, we've got one announcement, and then we're going to hand it over to Aaron. Stuart?
Hey, everybody. If you haven't heard of it, now you have. It's going to be Friday, July 28th. It's at the Convention Center. We got a lot of great speakers. We got about 28 speakers coming from across the country and region, covering everything. Tickets, fantastic price, $75, includes lunch. There's going to be an event hosted by Squid. It's going to be a lot of fun. If you're a student, tickets only $50, and if you get your company to send 6 or more, it's only $60 discount. Big shout out to my friends at Unum. They've almost registered 40 folks. Yeah, isn't that great? So everybody. City Summit, find it. Thanks.
Of applause.
Hey, howdy. All right, my mic's up. Cool deal. All right, thank you all for coming out. If you don't know me, if you haven't seen me up here before, I am a web standards and accessibility advocate at Microsoft. So I work a lot with their browser team, though I am not technically on the browser team. And let's see, I'm big in. And today I want to talk to you guys about progressive web apps. But before I do that, I wanted to kind of single out an app that I think is quite interesting. This is Expense Manager from the folks at Vadin. I do a lot of traveling as part of my job, as you can imagine, and obviously need to keep track of my expenses as I'm doing that. And I really love that their app is really simple and elegant in this regard. It's snappy, it provides a really great overall user experience, and it's cross-platform, which is nice because I end up of different operating systems, and the fact that this is on a bunch of different operating systems. It's also available as a desktop app, which is pretty cool. And obviously on this, everything's a little bit easier to kind of scan since you're looking at giant spreadsheets and such. But the same level of attention to detail user experience is there, whether you're on this desktop app or whether you're on the mobile version of the app, which is nice to see. Demo that Vadim put together uses a lot of their web components. If you've heard the word web components before, they do a lot of work in the Polymer space with web components and such. So now that we've seen a progressive web app in production, I want to talk a little bit about what progressive web apps are, just so I can make sure that everybody is on the same page before we kind of go down this rabbit hole. So you'll hear me use the terms progressive web app and PWA interchangeably throughout. Often you'll hear them referred to as PWA. But I want to focus first on the web app part. I'm going to skip over progressive. I'll come back to that in a moment. Now, the term web app may sound like something that you can put your finger on, right? Like the Vadin demo of the consider a web app. But really, a web app in the progressive web app context could really be now, Frances Berryman was the one who mainly she came up with it as a marketing term for this collection of technologies that enable the web to be more than used to it being. She could have just as easily have called them progressive website, because essentially that's what we're talking about. We're talking about taking something that is a website that exists on the web and making it into something that is more than just a website. So we're promoting a web project to being more native-ish. Okay. So if anyone here familiar with hosted web apps? It was something that Windows actually introduced in Windows. And that's what we're evolving into progressive web apps, is we're taking this hosted web app shell, which I'll talk a little bit more in a minute. But it's basically inheriting from this idea of being a hosted web app, which but was still able to be distributed in a store, which is kind of cool. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So I want to really quickly do a comparison. On the left here, you have the native Twitter app screen. Both of them have a very similar few little nuances here and there, but the Twitter Lite, which is the one on the right, is only about a month old. Now it's about 2 months old. When this screenshot was taken, it was only about a month old that they had experience, just kind of demonstrating that a progressive web app is very much capable of being like what we would consider traditionally a native debate, right? Should I build something native or should I build something? Now, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So this concept of creating something having something live on the web and or building something with these rather, and having it exist in a traditionally native software space is not a terribly new concept. If you go back to 2007, Adobe introduced, in 2009, Palm introduced WebOS, which was an operating system completely built on web technologies. If you wanted to write a native app for processing for CSS layouts and JavaScript and stuff like that closer to the metal inside of the operating system in order to facilitate that. And then, of course, Firefox OS, the Chrome embedded framework, Chromebooks, these all run web technologies as well. And then there are countless tools that have kind of sprouted up over to build native experiences. So obviously there's something about using web apps are really a brilliant way of doing this in a very standardized way as opposed to kind of a haphazard approach. So I want to take a few minutes to look at what makes a progressive app. If you're not building responsibly in 2017, I don't know what you're doing, honestly. People have all kinds of crazy device sizes and stuff like that, and it's only getting crazier, so you should be building this in this way anyway. They are network independent. They're able to work offline in some fashion, whether that just means loading content or server later. They're able to operate in an offline scenario. They are app-like in terms of an app, but it does mean that they feel the flow is more app-like and less kind of jerky and janky. They are fresh, they're always up to date because they're on the web. That's one of the things the web does really well. Every time you load a web page, too deep into Service Worker, but you can do things like background refreshes of content even when folks don't have your website open in a tab, which is kind of neat. They're safe. So all progressive web apps are served over HTTPS. For the most part, man-in-the-middle attacks and stuff like that. There are still ways around it. Anybody who paid attention to the go-go in-flight, basically spoofing can still get in the way. But for the most part, that will protect you from in terms of infected routers or perhaps people with pineapples and stuff like that elsewhere. They're discoverable because they're on the web. They are indexable by search engines and the like. JSON LD for additional descriptions of your content in order richer context for search engines. They are re-engageable in many instances. So this could be through something like push notifications to let somebody know that new content is available or that their order's been processed or what have you. This means that users, if they find a particular website to be very useful, they can install it to their, and I'll talk about how that'll happen in a minute. And then linkable features of your web project via a URL. So they can bookmark it, they can share it, that sort of stuff too. So I want to tuck into the installable bit a little bit first, because this is the piece that really sets PWAs apart from your standard run-of-the-mill website. So this brings us to that PWA versus native debate. To me, it's not so much a debate as we should be choosing our development approach to have options, right? It's always good to have options. And both approaches honestly have their strengths. So for me, it always depends which is the right one to go with. Now, often the web gets dismissed for not having enough features, right? Not having enough access to things. And that's changing pretty rapidly. So if you go to what web can do today, it will actually give you a rundown of the specific browser that you're in and what it's capable of doing. And you might actually be surprised by some of the options that are in here, such as like Bluetooth access. The user experience is really good. Does it really? No. We don't often discuss in terms of native versus web is the time to market discussion. So with a traditional web and native approach, which is what a lot of apps do, you end up building your core API, and then you build the web version, and you have to host that. You build the iPhone and iPad version, you have to submit that to the App Store. Same thing for the Android to the Play Store. Same thing for whatever other platforms you're going to do, Windows, submitting it to the web Windows Store or the Mac App Store. And that takes time. Now, on the flip side, if you were to approach building software at PWA systems for free, you can use if you can build the wrap. In my experience, at least, it's much cheaper to find folks who can build a web project than trying to assemble a team to do Swift. And then they're only focused on doing, the iPhone, iPad, and the Mac OS version, right? So you're kind of limiting yourself, whereas if you build on the web, you can distribute to all these different platforms. So I think there's a lot of benefits there. All right, circling back. Focus on the progressive aspect now of the platforms. So let's look into progressive enhancement, since that after all. So in this context, progressive is standing for progressive enhancement. I'll give a quick analogy, audio as an example of this. So back in the days of audio and stereophonic sound, okay? And what was neat about this is the way that they approached it, even could easily be mixed down to a mono channel and be listened to anybody who just had a single speaker, right? Over time, stereophonic gave way to quadraphonic or surround sound, and then we got 5.1 channels and 7.1 channels and 16.2 channels, creating more and more immersive sound experiences. But even though a sound recording might be mixed for 16.2, movies, television, and music that is mixed for all, and you can still use it on your phone when you put it in landscape mode, and it's coming out of 2 speakers, but to focus on the core purpose and tasks for a given project, and then to create better experiences as we're able to take advantage of opportunities, whether it's made to just be heard, like that's the core purpose, right? And then it could be mono, it could be stereo, it could be quadraphonic, and so on and so forth. Better and better experiences as people are able to take advantage of them. It doesn't mean you can't create that 22.2 channel sound version of your web project. It just means that at the core, somebody still needs to be able to. In other words, you're never putting restrictions on your user. You're not creating technological restrictions. You're creating no matter what, whether they're on a crappy smartphone that's a track phone they got for $25 at Target, or whether they're on a $700 or $800 iPhone. Back through the history, which I'm adding. And in this, we have the type equals email. So browsers that may not support it, right? In that case, they will actually provide a default HTML5 came along. So that becomes an experience delta against email. Just rely on the browser to do that for us, which is pretty nice. And then there are some contexts where a user will get a virtual keyboard, which is a pretty nice enhancement as well. Of course, there are other instances, desktop, certain older mobile devices where they won't. And that's okay. And this indicates that the field is, well, required. So something needs to be in here in order for the browser to allow the form to be submitted. So if the browser supports email validation or supports required validation, it will block it. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And that's okay. To ARIA required automatically. And in some instances it is, but the playing field's not complete. So it's good to double up on them. But it's important to realize that the browser needs to know what ARIA required is and know to expose that to assistive technology. And then whatever assistive technology the user is actually using has to implement that in order for the user to actually benefit Back to the enhancements, and at least this is how I would chart the enhancements. We have the base of the ARIA required attribute. That's an enhancement. Okay, I get to know if I'm non-sighted or using a headless UI. I get to be informed that the field is required. Then we have validation of whether it's required, validation of whether it's an email address, and finally, a virtual keyboard to help me more quickly input an email address. And so all along the way, we keep getting a better and better experience. That's progressive enhancement. So as I mentioned, progressive enhancement ensures that people can use your product no matter what, but you could just as easily swap in PWA for progressive enhancement here. And the reason is that's an enhancement, right? It ensures that people can use your product even. I often have things like that happen where all of a sudden something that was loading just stops. Lower potential overall cost for your users. That's a pretty nice enhancement that comes with PWAs and can be accomplished using Service Worker and caching. Access to native APIs, if they're available, things like somebody's address book, their calendar, that sort of stuff, all of that starts to, these are all ways that progressive enhancement, or that PWAs are a progressive enhancement. And the two technical linchpins of PWA, which are a web app manifest, which is basically just a JSON file describing your site, and Service Worker are both progressive enhancements in and of themselves, because if the browser that somebody happens to be understand or use either of them, it just ignores them and your site works the way it was normally, right? It's just a website. But if the browser and the operating system do support those, then you can create this much richer experience where somebody could install your application to their desktop or to their home screen, which is kind of cool too. So kind of being your own man in the middle, you can do a lot of crazy things. You can manage caching, which is the way that a lot of people end up using Service Worker. So they'll cache their CSS and their JavaScript file that are used everywhere on the site. And then maybe they'll cache pages as people request them, right? So that if somebody goes back to that URL and their network connection happens to drop, you can still present them with that stale version of the page. Right? You can also do things like background sync. You can even do crazy things like, hey, check to see if the browser understands WebP, and maybe you dynamics for JPEG images and swap them to WebP in order to give a smaller download. You can do stuff like that in Service Worker. It's crazy. There's some really, really neat things that you can do there. So Service Worker is a whole can of worms and probably a talk unto itself. But there's a lot of really neat things that you can start to do there. You can even get sort of granular in terms of determining, do I want to look for a connection first and pull the asset from the server if it's available, and then fall back to the cache version, or do I want to go the other way around? And you can sync things in the background, and Service Worker also helps manage push notifications and stuff like that. And over time, right now we're at kind of Service Worker 1.0. Over time, Service Worker a lot more things, a lot more interactions, and become even more powerful. So they're a neat technology to look into if you had to using apps sit in terms of Windows and how we're approaching things. Now, Microsoft is not the only company doing this. Google was the first one to kind of coin the term, and they worked on PWAs for about 2 years before they actually debuted them to the public. But they are available on Android now. Firefox also has support for PWAs at this point within Android, Opera 2. And Microsoft is working on it right now in Edge. I guess, if I were to make a guess, is that Apple's trying to figure out the whole monetization angle, because as soon as PWAs come along, it's really going to cannibalize a lot of the stuff that's in their store. And they won't have the ability to tack the, they just dropped it. Was it 15% for in-app purchases now that they're taking? They just dropped it from 30, but yeah. Samsung's also on board with this. So I want to talk a little bit about how PWAs are working in the Windows space, since I think it's really interesting because a lot of the story up to now with PWAs has been very mobile focused, and Windows is actually looking at it from a desktop perspective as well. So to go a little bit back in history, with Windows 7, which was kind of interesting, especially that far back, right? So you had this custom sticky tab that sat in the taskbar of, and it also provided a customizable browser UI and stuff like that, which was kind of neat. Now, as I mentioned earlier, in Windows 8, you could build a packaged app using web technologies, which was also kind of cool. In Windows 10, they introduced hosted web apps. So as I mentioned, this was a way of taking your website, wrapping it in a container, and then putting it in the Windows Store and being able to distribute it that way. And so now we're in the process of taking our support of the web to the next level with progressive web apps, which are kind of built on this HWA technology. So in terms of what is supported currently in Windows, we have the Fetch API, which is a core underpinning of how service workers work. Fetch, if you're not familiar, it's kind of like a new and better version of Ajax. So you can handle all kinds of requests, and it's all promise-based. So if you're getting into ES6 and promises and that sort of stuff, Fetch API is your friend. There's the web app container, which was the HWA wrapper. And then there already are all of these runtime APIs in Windows that are made available to JavaScript. Access to Cortana. You can actually inform Cortana of well over a year ago now. And we're making really good progress on getting PWAs to land in Edge and Windows. And these three remaining kind of underpinnings of Service Worker are going to be lighting up in insider builds of Windows, which if you're not familiar with that, we have an insider program where you can actually get early releases of Windows before they go wide. And the insider builds late this summer are going to start having Service Worker and Push and Cache API all lighting up in them. Initially, we're going to be putting this stuff behind a flag, so you'll need to go into About Flags in order to turn it on. But that's just so that we can actually thoroughly test it before we launch it wide to the public. We want to make sure there aren't bugs and such there. And no, I don't have container technology or your web app. It exists in an independent browser process, so it's separate from Edge. It has its own cache, has its own, it's got less overhead of data. If you wanted to build your own Netflix competitor and allow people to download full HD movies to their computer within your web app, you totally could do that, right? There will eventually, you know, if you start bogging down the computer with tons and tons of stuff and you use up all the storage, the browser will alert somebody that, hey, this one app is taking up a ton of storage, because your app will actually be in the settings and they'll be able to see how much room it's taking up, which is kind of cool too. You'll have access to offline background processes and access to the Windows Runtime APIs. And one thing just to note on the Windows Runtime APIs, right now a lot of these are proprietary because we had that for years in Windows. And when the web notifications spec rolled out and was actually codified at the W3C, we mapped it such that you could do web notifications and it just goes ahead and pushes them through the old toast notification methodology. So we're not kind of locking you into our specific way of doing things. We will support the standards as they get standardized, which makes me happy because I don't like to see lots of proprietary stuff. So essentially in the way that and when all the technology lands, and you'll have all of the additional offline stuff with Service Worker and things like that. So how does a user discover a progressive web app? So again, I'm going to walk kind of through the Windows scenario mostly here. You can already do some discovery. If any of you use Chrome on Android, it will notify you if you spend a lot of time on a site that is a PWA. It'll say, hey, did you know that you could install this? And you can add it to your home screen, and you'll get that PWA-like functionality. In fact, I know a lot of people that have switched over to Twitter Lite entirely from the Twitter native app, because it's a lot smaller too. To the store, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, but also enabling people to install directly from search results, which is kind of cool too. So if somebody's searching for your product in Bing, we're going to surface that is installable, and somebody can go ahead. This was my initial question, like when we started talking about bringing PWAs into the store, like why do I want my PWA in the store? This doesn't make any sense to me. I'm a web guy. I just want my thing to exist on the web, right? So I talked to a lot of people within, and I got a lot of really good, thoughtful responses about this. First of all, it's about putting native apps and the web, right? The web is not an also-ran. The web is every bit as capable as native is. And so we want to put that on agility and for safety. And that's what an app store provides. Right? And for us as developers, we get more insight into our users and how they're interacting with our apps when they go through an app store process. So if you create a PWA and put it in the Windows Store, you get analytics about installs, uninstalls, shares, performance, all of that sort of stuff that you may not be able to get as easily if somebody's just adding it to their home screen. Just go to that one place to download software for their system. That reduces the cognitive overhead of getting a new device set up, right? So that's kind of an additional benefit for users as well. They don't have to track, which is nice. It also means you could create, if you're in an enterprise, you can create basically install packages. This previously was known as Manifold.js, and basically it's a node package that will automatically take your website with its web app manifest, and it will create the necessary AppX file to put into the Windows Store and walk you through the process, which is kind of cool. Incidentally, it will also create the wrappers if you want them for going into the App Store for iOS, the macOS Store. It will create wrappers to enable your app, I think, to go all the way back to Windows. Obviously, some features won't work back there, but it will create the wrapper for it. And it'll do it for, I think, but it'll walk you through the test if you don't have that. But if you do have one already, it'll go ahead and use that. So this is a really easy and free tool to put together that sort of stuff, which is nice. Now, the other side of it is what we're calling passive ingestion. And I don't really like this term. I don't really like the term ingestion. It sounds weird. But we wanted a way for our users of the Windows Store to be able to find quality web apps. And there will be a way to opt out of it, which I'll cover in a moment, if you don't want that to happen. But basically what we've been doing is we've been crawling the web using the Bing crawler and identifying PWAs that are out there on the open web. And we're viewing the web app manifest. So if you've got a web app manifest on your site, we're viewing that as a positive signal that you want your website treated as an app, right? It's like raising your hand, essentially. And so we're listening to that signal, and then we're rating it as a candidate for the store. We're going to automate the conversion into a PWA, or from the PWA into an AppX file, and then start the submission to the store process, assemble the store metadata from the web app manifest and such, and put it in the store. Initially, what we'll do is we'll actually put it in the store as a temporary play. Hey, we have this preview in the store, and you will be able to take it over and manage the store entry from then on. Or tell us that you don't want it in the store, which is possible too. And we completely understand that you may not want this to happen to a product that you're working on, and that's totally cool. If you add this to your robots.txt file, you can basically stop the Bing crawler from looking at your manifest file. Obviously, you want to change this to whatever your manifest file name is. If you use the .manifest extension, obviously that would be different. But just block access for the Bing crawler to hit your manifest file. So it's still early days, but I'm going to kind of walk you through our current thinking for this process. So in our initial crawl for web app manifests, we discovered over 1.5 million manifests on 800,000 domains. It's for ingestion. First off, some aren't PWAs. Some have a web app manifest, but maybe it's a boilerplate manifest that came with a particular framework they're using. Or maybe looking at the web app manifest and determining, does this suggest quality? Is it not a boilerplate? Is there a name there? Do we have a description? And is there an icon, at least that's 192 pixels square or greater? If it's not running under HTTPS, we're not going to do anything with it, because that's one of the barriers to entry for a PWA. Does the site have a valid server? Specific things we might be looking for, but initially we're going to be looking at how popular is this site, looking at things like Alexa and Quantcast and stuff, because obviously the sites that are more popular are the ones that we're going to want to bring into the store, because our user will want them. And then, does the site pass automated quality testing? That will be an initial thing, and then we'll check to make sure that it's actually free content. We're not going to automatically put in stuff that people have to pay for. But if you have something that people pay for, you can put it in the store yourself through the manual process, no problem there. And then the final step of the passive ingestion is we'll actually be reviewing to make sure that the app meets the standards of the Windows Store. We want to make sure it doesn't violate, basically take control of that and manage how it looks and feels. Now, no matter how it goes in there, it will end up looking just like a normal app entry. So it'll use things like the name key, the manifest, the description, the icon. You can even have screenshots and stuff in your web app manifest, and all of that will be ported in and become your store page. And from a user's perspective, a PWA will just be an app. It'll just be something that they install, that they can uninstall, that they can view the settings on, and so on and so forth. At this point, you may be wondering, should I forget everything I know and start building a PWA? No, don't forget everything you know. Quality app, right? Or quality experience for your users. Will Microsoft drop support for my favorite programming language in favor of PWA? Some people do wonder about that because they got burned by Silverlight or stuff like that. No, still doing everything else. We're just trying to make the web a better option for building apps. Are progressive web apps the right choice for my project? Maybe. When evaluating native app development, if there are, native might be the way to go. What's the total cost in terms of time and money of building and maintaining each platform-specific app? Weigh that back and forth like we looked at the strengths and weaknesses of your dev team. How hard, or if you're creating a new thing, how hard would it be to assemble a team, craft an experience, like sweat over every detail about the user experience and make it feel just right on iOS? Probably want to spend all of your time writing Swift, right? And building a truly native app that's completely tailored for that platform. If you're maintaining something that's on multiple, same identical experience across all of those platforms, and you have a website already, it might make more sense to double down on that web version and just make it a PWA. Right? It's a better use of your time. If you're planning a brand new product and the web meets all of your requirements for in terms of access to APIs and stuff like that, then by all means do a PWA. It makes a lot of sense and you get a lot of bang for your buck. So maybe. It all depends. And then finally, should I consider progressive web apps a solid option when developing software? Yes, definitely. Thank you all very much. And now I'm happy to answer questions. I know we're just about up on 1 o'clock, but I'm happy to take some questions if you have them.
Got time for one or two?
Listen, my question is that I noticed you didn't really cover very much about how we might allow the user to stay in control of the handset, of the device, right? It seems to me like user to assume more of the expense running the program, right? So if you have an app that's always on, it's always transmitting, then it's always running up a bill for the user, okay? Yeah. What controls are in place under these systems to at least keep them to 500 competing programs that are always trying to be on?
So that, first of all, overall, PWAs are going to be much lighter to download for users. So that initial hit that somebody's going to take when installing a PWA versus installing a native app is going to be much lighter. And additionally, as they're moving through the app, when you're in that service worker context, when you can cache as much stuff as you want, you can move a lot of that stuff offline so that you're not being as chatty with the server. You're not requiring as much of a network connection. And in fact, if you don't do background sync at all with a PWA, you're not going to be hitting that. You're not going to be drawing down the battery life of the device. Sync's an actual expense well. So PWAs are very much focused on reducing the cost of accessing software and of using software to make that a lighter experience. So to answer your question, it is something that's being thought a lot about, and there will be tools as a developer to control how often you're doing things like, and you don't have to do it if you don't need it. So you're not going to be automatically spooling that stuff up. It'll be running in a background process, but operating systems and browsers are getting very smart about sleeping tabs and stuff like that in the browser context, and so they'll technology to the PWA approach as well, so you're not going to be burning through a lot of RAM and stuff like that, and kind of taking up, a lot of them will suspend things. And I'm imagining, again, since it's not a fully baked spec yet, I don't know all of the details of how the background sync stuff is going to work, but my guess is that it will register with the operating system, and the operating system will take that PWA from a point of being in stasis, assuming you don't have it open, and rehydrate it, do what it needs to do, and then close it down again so that it's not consuming resources. So it's trying to be very smart about that stuff. And a lot of what PWA is focused on is being cognizant of. Other questions?
We're pretty much out of time, so
okay.
Maybe you can take them after?
Yeah.
Will you be around? Okay.
Yeah.
Everybody give Aaron a round of applause. Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate it. We'll see you guys next week.